Nearly $900 billion. That's how much the United States spends on its military in a single year. To put that into perspective, if you took the military budgets of China, Russia, India, the United Kingdom, France, Germany, Japan, South Korea, Saudi Arabia, and Italy, and stacked them together, the United States would still be right there at the top, spending more than the next several countries combined. That number alone should make anyone pause, because it's not just a budget line, it's a statement about priorities, power, and how the modern world is organized. So the obvious question is, why? What exactly is the United States buying with all that money? And more importantly, does it actually make anyone safer? When people imagine military spending, they usually picture tanks rolling across deserts or fighter jets screaming across the sky. And yes, some of the money absolutely goes there. But that's only the surface. The reality underneath is much bigger, messier, and far more expensive than most people realize. The U.S. military isn't just an army. It's a vast, globe-spanning institution. It's a bureaucracy, a logistics network, a technology lab, a healthcare system, and in many ways, a parallel government. It employs over 3.4 million people when you count active duty troops, reservists, National Guard members, and civilian employees. That alone costs an enormous amount of money. Salaries, housing allowances, healthcare, pensions, disability benefits, education programs, and lifelong care for veterans long after they leave service. In fact, personnel costs alone eat up well over $170 billion every year. That includes not just soldiers on the front lines, but teachers at military schools, doctors at military hospitals, engineers designing systems that may never be deployed, analysts tracking global threats, and lawyers handling everything from contracts to courts-martial. When people say the Pentagon is one of the largest employers in the world, that's not an exaggeration. It's a reflection of just how massive this institution really is. But even that isn't the biggest expense. The single largest category in the U.S. defense budget is something called operations and maintenance. It sounds boring, and honestly, it is. But it's also where the money really disappears. This category alone costs more than $350 billion annually, more than the entire GDP of many countries. This is the money required just to keep the machine running. Fuel for ships, jets, and tanks. Repairs for equipment that breaks constantly, often faster than it was designed to. Training exercises across land, sea, air, space, and cyberspace. Transportation costs, administrative systems, IT infrastructure, intelligence operations, medical care, environmental cleanup from old military sites contaminated decades ago. Disaster relief missions, anti-drug operations, security at international events. And then there are the bases. The United States operates roughly 750 to 800 military bases outside its own borders, spread across Europe, Asia, the Middle East, Africa, and the Pacific. No other country even comes close. Each one of these bases is essentially a small American town, complete with housing, schools, grocery stores, gyms, hospitals, and fast food chains. Running these bases requires shipping supplies across oceans, paying local staff, protecting infrastructure, and maintaining massive facilities year-round, often in politically sensitive regions. This global footprint is one of the clearest answers to why the U.S. spends so much. Most countries build militaries to defend their borders. The United States builds a military to project power everywhere. Since the end of World War II, the U.S. has taken on the role of global enforcer of the international system it helped create, protecting trade routes, guarding allies, deterring rivals, responding to crises thousands of miles away, sometimes within hours. Whether you think that role is stabilizing or destabilizing, it comes with an enormous price tag. This is the cost of being the world's military superpower. Then there's the future. Every year, the Pentagon spends around $140 billion on research and development. That's more than most countries spend on their entire military. This money goes into artificial intelligence, cyber warfare, hypersonic missiles, autonomous drones, space-based systems, missile defense, and experimental weapons that may never even see combat, but must exist just in case. Some of this research eventually spills into civilian life. GPS, the internet, voice recognition, drones. These technologies all have roots in military research. But much of it stays locked behind classified walls, built for one purpose: staying ahead of potential enemies in a world where technological advantage can decide wars before they even begin. And now we get to the part most people think about when they hear military spending. Weapons. Fighter jets that cost over $100 million each. Missiles that cost more than $1 million per launch. Warships that cost billions before they even touch water. The F-35 fighter jet program alone is projected to cost taxpayers over $1.7 trillion across its lifetime, when development, production, maintenance, and upgrades are all included. And that brings us to a controversial reality. More than half of the Pentagon's budget doesn't go directly to soldiers or bases at all. It goes to private corporations. Over the last few decades, dozens of smaller defense firms were absorbed into these giants, leaving just a handful of companies controlling most major weapon systems. When competition disappears, costs tend to rise, and they often do. This lack of competition has consequences. When there's only one company that can build a certain jet, missile, or radar system, prices can spiral. There have been documented cases where the Pentagon paid thousands of dollars for parts that were already sitting in warehouses worth only a few dollars. Independent audits have repeatedly found overcharging, inefficiencies, and waste, sometimes on a staggering scale. And here's where things get uncomfortable. These same defense companies spend millions of dollars every year lobbying Congress. They donate to political campaigns on both sides of the aisle. They hire former generals, Pentagon officials, and lawmakers as executives and consultants. This revolving door between government and industry means the people deciding how much to spend often have deep connections to the companies receiving the money. There's also a quieter incentive at work: jobs. Defense contractors intentionally spread their factories and facilities across dozens of states and congressional districts. That way, military spending becomes local employment. Cutting a weapons program doesn't just mean fewer missiles, it means lost jobs in a lawmaker's district. And no politician wants to be blamed for that. So the system feeds itself. More spending creates more jobs. More jobs create political support. Political support creates more spending. But here's the deeper question that doesn't show up neatly in spreadsheets. Are we actually safer? Supporters argue that military strength prevents war, that a powerful military deters enemies before conflicts begin. History offers some evidence for that idea, but history also shows the darker side of arms races, how one country's buildup forces others to respond, escalating tensions and multiplying risks. During the Cold War, the US and the Soviet Union each built tens of thousands of nuclear weapons in the name of security. That didn't make the world safer. It brought it closer to destruction than ever before. And every dollar spent on weapons is a dollar not spent elsewhere: on infrastructure, on healthcare, on education, on clean water, on climate resilience, on diplomacy. The slow, frustrating, unprofitable work of preventing conflicts before soldiers are ever deployed. So when people ask why the US military spends so much money, the answer isn't simple. It's history, it's global power, it's politics, it's corporate profit, it's fear. And it's a system that rewards expansion far more than restraint. Now, here's something I want you to think about, and let me know your thoughts in the comments. If security means safety, stability, and a better future, how much of that really comes from weapons alone? And how much comes from the things we don't usually label as defense,